Good morning, everybody. This is John Palmer, Dutch Dr. Speed Selling, and this is the Raging Verbalist number 243 for all of you who are keeping track of it. Raging Verbalist is a topic-based it's not podcast, but it's like a video, let's just say. Let's call it that. We're available on YouTube and Facebook. Our Facebook group is the Position to Win Book. And I think that's right. Anyway, it's one of those Fridays. We got to get rolling here. So, and with me as always, I'll just do the quick introduction. We'll dive right into it because it's just one of those topics that's just rolling along. So with me as always is the ever lovely Sandra. Sandra, welcome.
Hello, how are you doing? Besides busy.
Oh, just got too many ideas rolling through my head. So, and check it out. So, all right. So what are we talking about today?
All right, so we are talking about the Chinese EV market. So how many different brands of EVs are made in China?
Well, when the Chinese decided they wanted to get into the car business and they thought, well, EVs would be a great way to do it, and how we would go out and expand and all of that. And since they are some of you may be shocked, they are a communist country, a controlled economy, and therefore they provide loans and investment from the government. Is they said that any province or major city that could kind of prove that they could build a car would get money, and they peaked at about 500 manufacturers, which is far too many, given the fact that I can't imagine that any economy, even if you're 1.3 billion people, could absorb that many different manufacturers. And that was kind of the explosion on it. And now they have whittled that down to 200 or so manufacturers today. Still too many, in my opinion. This is why there's a mass fear around the world that they will be dumping cars, dumping products cheap. I don't know why anybody would ever think that kind of silliness, considering that we've seen it in many, many, many different markets. Well, I guess the EV market is the next one.
And what are the top three Chinese EV brands?
Well, the top three, number one is BYD, and they're making lots of noise all over the globe. They're trying to sell cars everywhere now, and they're kind of pushing their things out. The interesting thing about the different makes is that they will introduce products at such rapid fire. Now, here's a little clue for maybe any Chinese EV product managers, if they even have those, is that if you introduce a model, whatever that model is, and that model becomes successful, but then you introduce another model that competes against it, and then another model that competes against it, and you eventually start cannibalizing your own sales, that you will have a serious problem, because customers will go, wait a second, I just bought this a year ago, and now look where I'm at. So that's the number one builder. Number two is Geely. And Geely's done a lot of joint ventures. And in fact, they also, I believe, own Volvo. I say believe because I didn't confirm it. So the Polestar brand is actually Geely, even though it's built in Europe and supposedly has Volvo, engineering. It probably does, but it's Chinese sourced. Number three is NIO, N-I-O. And NIO's kind of cool thing is that they have this, looks like what we would probably think of as like a garage slash car wash, which is you drive your car in and then it automatically unscrews the battery pack and takes it out and then screws a new battery pack in, or whatever battery pack they happen to have, and then you drive off, and it makes it extremely fast to you're not recharging, you're basically replacing batteries. So NIO has been doing that for a period of time. That's kind of their little swing. And then I'll go past three because we Raging Verbalists, we like to over deliver, right? Under promise, over deliver. And number four is SAIC. They do a lot of work in building batteries. And then the final one, 5, is XPeng, XPENG. And they have, again, everybody's trying to find where they should go. So there's like lots and lots of different kinds of cars. And one of the things you want to remind yourself is that when they say, well, they can build a car and sell it for $6,000. Well, you got to understand that there are rides at Disneyland that have bigger spaces for people. I mean, it's just a tiny little car. Now, maybe it works for that environment. Can't imagine it working in, I don't know, where I grew up in Colorado. I don't think so.
And what country has been targeted by these EV makers?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that BYD has kind of done is they're like, well, how do we go outside of our market, right? Every market has its own peculiarities, their own needs, their own things. And the Australian market, Australia is about a 20 million person country. In fact, there's probably lots of cities bigger in China than 20 million. And BYD has been focused on that. So that's been kind of an interesting push there. And their big deal is that you get your vehicle and there is a price advantage. Now, let's stop here for a second. After World War II, the Japanese car manufacturers had been bombed, and all of those people. And the Japanese said, well, can we build cars? Yes, we've been building cars for a long time for our own market, but can we build them for export? They had seen how Europeans had built cars and shipped them to America. Japanese started shipping cars. Total disaster. They ended up hiring a couple of really smart guys, Peter Drucker and Edward Deming, and Toyota started their long march to becoming the best quality product you could buy in certain segments of cars. But they could do it cheaper because labor was cheaper and things were done differently. Well, then the Koreans came along, and if you have not been aware, the Koreans have become a big player because, once again, it was cheaper. In fact, they bought complete designs from the Japanese and then built them for the Korean market and eventually sold them all around the world. And the Hyundai Group is a big player in automobiles. Chinese seem to be on that same road and path. However, they have a lot of different companies, and BYD has kind of emerged as the top. And the same kind of thing, they're selling a lot on price and offering, it's a lot for the money kind of thing. So those people who are bargain hunters are looking at these cars in Australia.
And have they been successful or not?
Well, BYD has done so much work in the Australian market, and they in fact did something that's really smart. And this is a lesson for all of you, which is they got goodwill ambassadors. They have people who would be live testimonials that were not paid by the company to do this thing. And there was, and they can't make this up, but the Cool family, Cool, that's I think it's spelled, Mr. and Mrs. Cool became goodwill ambassadors for BYD. They were in newspapers. They were, featured prominently in news stories and how excited they were because they got their BYD car and they loved it, loved it, loved it. This is amazing. The value is there. Everything is fantastic. Funny thing happened. The car just passed about a year. They had 33,000 kilometers. You'll have to do the conversion yourself to figure out how many miles that is, but not a lot of miles, in my opinion. And but of course, I guess they're driving a bit, and they were driving down the road at about 100 kilometers an hour, which I could tell you is around 60 something miles an hour, and the car bricked. It just died, and then they started, and they went from goodwill ambassador to hating on them, and in fact, were really pissed off, and that became big news because, of course, BYD having a goodwill ambassador and having a car that dies, the thing that you should do if you're going to be in this kind of situation is you should quietly and discreetly either replace the battery pack, which apparently had some kind of defect or some kind of problem, and you quietly replace it. You don't let this get out. But more importantly, you don't like quibble back and forth. Well, there was a lot of quibbling. And not only that, they really, at some point in time, you just got to like replace the car, because if you don't replace the car, well, your reputation goes down the drain. Not a good idea. So that one hasn't played out. I don't know the end of that, but I can tell you the Cool family are, pun intended, hot under the collar because, well, their BYD has crapped out.
So, what is the marketing lesson from that story?
The biggest lesson that you can get from a story like this is you have to be very careful what you promise because you might have to deliver upon it. That's why when all of these supposed internet marketing geniuses tell you that you want to have a big ass guarantee and you want to put this stuff in there, you better be willing to back it up. You better be willing to do whatever it takes to make that work, because if you don't, what's going to happen is that your reputation goes right down the drain. And I'm going to tell you, you don't want to have that happen. So the most important thing you need to do is to make sure that whatever market you're going to approach, whatever you're going to start delivering, that you understand the implications of setting an expectation and meeting, exceeding that expectation, because people are going to go way over the top. And I think the mistake they made, and again, this is an isolated incident, but it wouldn't have been that big a deal because in the big scheme of things, I mean, they're a good sized company. They really needed to just say, okay, here's a new car. We made it right. Sorry, it won't happen again. Now, if you're out there wondering how to make sure that your business is not in that kind of trouble, go out and pick up my book. Most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. It just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize it. Position to Win. In fact, you can go to position2winbook.com, position2winbook.com. You can get the book directly from us. I'll sign it. Tell me what you want to say. Hey, Bob, have a wonderful life or whatever. And then you can always go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever books are sold, you can go request a physical copy. Available digitally in Kindle, Nook, and Apple iBooks. Now, so that's over here, and maybe it solves your problem and you don't get into the same issues that BYD did. On the other side is Remote Work for a Better World, which is exclusively on Amazon Kindle, and we'll talk to you about. And even though it is a few years ago, was written specifically because of the pandemic situation. But what I can tell you is that it will tell you things that you should do to make your life easier and better as you work remotely, because there's a lot of hate going on about remote work. And I think that it is still a very viable option, not for everybody, not for everything, but it should give people and companies more flexibility to hire better people for wherever they're at and make sure that works. And then also, if you're there at position2winbook.com, pick up a mug, the Raging Verbalist mug, one that I use on a consistent basis. So if you want a little bit of rage in your life, you want to be able to say it, get yourself a good mug, because as I say, everything tastes just a little bit better, has a little bit of an edge in the Raging Verbalist mug. Okay, Sandra, where do we go next?
All right. So what are the barriers to the US market?
Well, the biggest barrier to the US market is that we are a very large country. And if you ever drive across the country, you'll kind of understand that. I've done lots of road trips around the US. And so you got to keep that in mind. There's cautionary tales because there are brands that are not sold in the US anymore because, well, they've tried and they failed and they tried and they failed. I learned that lesson early on in my life, and that is I've always liked cars a lot. And my friend Mickey and I, who was my first business partner, we go to this junkyard, and we used to go walking around junkyards. That's when you could still do that. And there were these junkyards. And the best part about junkyards in Colorado is that, see, these cars were not going to rust away. They're just sitting there. And against this back fence, we come upon, it's like discovering that, you know, ancient fish or bird that you thought it would have gone extinct, and there were these cars sitting there, and they turned out to be Renault, which is the right way to say it. Americans would say Renault, but Renault Dolphins. And there was not one, there was not two. It turns out there were 11 of them. And we were like, wow. And they weren't like bashed, because most of the stuff is, somebody hit a tree or killed a deer or, had some terrible collision or something. But these were looking like pretty good shape. Now, all the tires had gone flat and all of that, but they were looking like pretty good shape. So we walk up to the, up to the office and say, hey, what's the story about the Renaults, or Renaults, because I didn't know how to pronounce it right. And he goes, well, you guys look like you're pretty industrious guys. Tell you what, 5 of them for roughly, $1,500. And we're like, what? Yeah. I said, but, they're not running as well. You guys are industrious. You can take 5 of them and you can get a car out of it. And I went, well, that's kind of crazy. He goes, well, you can take all 11 of them. He goes, listen, I really want to get rid of them. You can take all 11 of them for, I don't know, 2,000 or 2,100 or 2,500, whatever. Frankly, it looked like if we had given them $200 and hauled their crap away, we would have taken it, because of course they're taking up room. So we go back and we tell my, our 2 fathers, and they are like, you're crazy. No, you're not going to do that. First off, where are you going to put them all? Second, how are you going to ever get this thing to work? Because by that point in time, Renault had skipped the market and they were gone. Now they did try several comebacks and it always failed. And an interesting side note is that the guy said, hey, you can go look at him, get inside. He goes, but be careful. And I said, well, yeah, because there seems to be all this white powder, this little white dust. And no, it's not what you're thinking. Don't get that out of your head. But inside was all this fine white powder. And I said, what's that? And he goes, well, French Guiana, Papillon, all of that, they have rubber trees. And those are natural rubber seals around all the doors, all the gaskets, everything around that are natural rubber. And that natural rubber dries out in Colorado, and it just slowly but surely decomposes into this fine powder. So, geez, isn't that a fun idea? So Renault found a really hard market to come to, which was the US, and they failed, and they failed miserably. And in fact, it was one of those things that every time I ever met somebody who owned a French car, I always knew one thing. First off, you never had to worry about them like chasing you in the car because, well, it wasn't going to go. And the second thing is that they would always have a story about how they were looking for a part for something that was impossible to find. So that's like so they should take heed and warning because the market hasn't gotten any easier, it's gotten harder. So if they're going to attack the US market, think about that very carefully.
And what are some of the things they can do to improve their chances in this market?
Biggest thing, which is what we talk a lot about in the book, and I talk a lot about in training and coaching and speeches, is that you need to focus on a specific part of the country because you need to get the dealer network. You need to have some kind of network because service and parts become the big thing. You couldn't buy, if you wanted to buy a part for that Renault, I guess you could write somebody in France as if they would read English and buy some weird ass part. But that's very true of what you're going to run into in the US. And so if they don't focus on a very specific market, a specific area, and build up that network, I think that's going to be a serious problem because what's going to take place is that they will not be able to maintain and keep those cars running. See, the difference between making a cell phone, whether it's a cheap one or a good one or whatever in between, because they can make fantastic phones. We know that, they manufacture iPhones and, high-end Samsungs are made in Vietnam and everything. But the reality of it is that a car lasts a lot longer and is you consistently think about how long something's going to last, especially today. At one point in time, if somebody drove a 10-year-old car, you'd go, what is wrong with that person? It's out of date, looks kind of funky, looks all that. But now that we have essentially aerodynamic cars that look like somebody carved it out of a bar of soap, you see a lot of cars that are 10, 20, 30 years old, especially living in a place like I do, and you'll see these cars lasting for a very long time. That has become one of those expectations that people have, and I think that's going to have a big effect on it. So they need to have that because Americans are going to be very picky. There are lots of what are called lemon laws, which means if the car is a lemon for whatever reason, and the consumer here is king. There's no big brother here. Well, there's big brother, but it's a different issue. But there's no big brother that's going to say, hey, we're going to tamp this thing down.
And would you be willing to buy a Chinese EV?
I guess if I could get it cheap enough, I would consider it. But one of my biggest concerns, and this is a bonus lesson for all of everybody out there, every one of you, is that the biggest cost of owning a car, any kind of vehicle, is depreciation. And depreciation means that you buy something and this thing goes down every single month. And EVs in general have had a terrible reputation because now that there's this used market, you see these things crashing and burning left and right. So if you have this off brand, not as popular, not as much resale, you're going to look at it and go, wow, this is going to just go downhill fast. So I would be very concerned about that because you're going to end up being stuck with that for a very long time. The other thing is that I can tell you, having purchased odd cars in the past, and I have done that, and at some point in time, I will tell the disastrous story about buying a Honda Clarity hydrogen powered, but that's one that I have to get through some counseling and be in a Zen state of mind because it makes me so agitated. But parts were impossible to find for that car, and that was Honda. I can't imagine some Chinese brand that's just getting started, that they're going to have the kind of parts depot that is necessary. So from a practical standpoint, I would find that difficult to make that decision. Sandra, how about yourself?
For me, it's a no. Personally, I'm just not in the EV space or not interested in an EV, just lack of charging availability for where I want to drive just to see my own family. So that's necessity number one. But two, I personally want like an American made vehicle or a brand that mostly manufactures here. Um, Personally, I'd say Chevy. We had them on the farm for a long time, and those vehicles lasted forever. I'm a buy it, keep it for a long time person. So, and like you said, parts, if I can, find it myself, or if there's a recall, take it right to the dealership, have it taken care of immediately. That's where I'm at.
So I'll put you down as a decided maybe. Okay, got it.
Sure.
Well, you know,
All
I think one of the things that they should do is put tow hooks on the front of the thing and put a tow mode, and then put a nylon cable, so if the thing craps out, you can tow it. And I'm saying this half in jest, but that's one of my biggest concerns about EVs, having rented a bunch of them, all Teslas, everything worked out fine. But when you get down to where that battery is getting low or something, yeah, range anxiety is a real thing, because the last thing you want to do is stuck on the side of the road, because it's not like a guy can drive up and pour a gallon of gas and you go somewhere. So yeah, that is a big concern of everybody.
Yeah. So what are some of the lessons for entrepreneurs, marketing, and salespeople?
Well, right now the Chinese are doing a very interesting thing. There's tons of EV hype. There's lots of tariffs that have gone up. There's a lot of barriers that are being put in place. Chinese manufacturers are saying, "Well, we're going to assemble them in Mexico or Spain or Hungary or wherever they're going to manufacture them." And then that way that it becomes more market oriented. In fact, the Italians are talking to them. Italian government's talking to them about taking over some of these underperforming plants. We are in a interesting point in time. Whether you believe EVs are in the future or not, there's going to be a place for EVs. First off, it's a great appliance. I mean, if I had an option to buy one, in fact, I just tried to buy a Tesla used that was coming out of Hertz, and the market was just stupid. I mean, I don't chase deals because every time I do, I always it doesn't work out. So frankly, the thing that we all want to learn is that the hype is large about things. So when you have a lot of hype, you better show up with something as close to flawless as possible. This has been a mistake that people have made in technology for a long time. EVs start to become more technology than car. Apple spent a lot of money trying to develop a car and realized, wow, this is a lot harder than building a laptop or building an iPhone or an iPad or something like that. It's just much harder to do. In fact, there is a company called VinFast. There's a Vietnamese EV maker. They're in California. They're trying to sell cars. They're struggling to do that. And they have stupid lease deals. And even with the stupid lease deals, they're struggling. I mean, how about a $47,000, $49,000 car with a $250 a month payment for 3 years? My guess is that they're struggling. And Kia is offering crazy deals where you can get a Kia for a lease deal for 2 years for, as I said, $189 a month. Don't quote me on that. Go find out if it's real or not. I don't know. I've seen a YouTube video about it. So the lesson for all of us, whatever you are, a business owner, an entrepreneur, marketing or salesperson, is be careful how far you hype something out, because somebody may actually call your hand and say, your bluff is called. Will you be able to deliver? Yes or no? I'm absolutely convinced that many of those 200 manufacturers will collapse and fail, because there is no way the market can absorb that many different brands. Differentiation is a real thing. And you, in the end of the day, got to know that people don't buy a car and 2 years later they change it. People would like to believe that, but the average age of a car in the US has gone up dramatically, partially because of the quality. Second thing is costing. And the third is the fact that when they become more reliable, they're less likely to change out. And with that, I just want to thank you all for joining us here on the Raging Verbalist. We do this every Friday on YouTube and also on the Facebook. group, which is Position to Win book, Position to Win book. For myself, John Paul Mendoza, Dr. Speed Selling, and the ever lovely Sandra, hopefully we have electrified you, enlightened you, and made you think, well, maybe I'll take a chance. And by the way, in the comments down below, if you want to put down that you would or would not buy one, again, I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm just looking at things and analyzing markets. And for that, we all can learn a lesson, and the lesson should be the good, the bad, and the ugly. Until next time, thank you very much.